Welcome back. After a 6-month hiatus, I finally get to work on the Riviera again. For those of you with full-time jobs and family, you know that life takes precedent over hobbies, and things get pushed to the back burner. Water heaters and roofs leak, cars break down, all those things take time away from recreational activity. But with my to-do list clear, I'm finally able to remove the rear end of the 1967 Buick Riviera. As with any maintenance involved with the rear of the car, it all starts with the wheels. In this case, removal of the wheel starts first with decorative hubcap. It's just held on with some springy claws. Sometimes they're easy to get off. But just like a normal car, once that's done, you just remove the lug nuts and the wheel slides off. Since the brake drums have previously been restored, they're the only part of the rear end of the car that actually looks nice. I decided to use a little parts organizer. You can get them at Harbor Freight, fairly cheap. Easy to see inside them with the clear lid. You can label them, making it really easy to be able to figure out where your parts all go back. Since I spent so much time restoring the drive shaft in the last video, I figured it was appropriate to try and destroy it in this one. You do have to remove the drive shaft the same way as we did in the last video, but you don't have to remove it completely. Just push it forward into the transmission. We start by removing the bolts that hold the drive shaft into the differential yoke. I don't remember the drive shaft being this difficult to get off the last time. I did remember that the drive shaft also needs to be supported to prevent the joints from binding or being damaged. After banging on it for too long, I finally realized what those two holes in the differential yoke were for. Just use a punch to knock out the drive shaft. With a car lift, you get to find all kinds of neat things, like leaking differentials, leaking transmissions, leaking oil pans, leaking transmission coolers, leaking power steering pumps, and so much more. The rear tank also has a leak, but it's not until the tank meets the filler neck, which I discovered the first time I tried filling up the car with gas. But it wasn't until I was underneath the car for the first time I saw the huge dents in the side of the tank. Removal of the rear end does not require the removal of the fuel tank, but since I have a replacement for it, and I was going to eventually do it anyway, I just decided to get rid of the tank and give myself more room to work underneath the car. If you read the service manual for removal of the gas tank, which I did not, it will tell you that the very first step would be to siphon all the gas from the tank, which I did not. The second step would be to remove the hoses, which at this point had turned to concrete. I was able to get a couple of them off, but all the rest had to be cut because they were just completely stuck to the metal fuel lines. The fuel sending unit needs to be unplugged. It comes off very easily and is pretty convenient to access. Next, remove the ground wire, which is attached via a black wire screw. And I could not see that from where I was, and that's going to come back to bite me in a little bit. Finally, disconnecting the support straps. The straps are held on by some long carriage bolts and a couple of nuts, which of course, like everything else, was rusty and difficult to remove. You're also supposed to remove the screws from the filler neck bracket, which I did not because I just don't think there is one on this car. While lowering the tank, this is where I discovered the grounding wire was still attached to it. Trying to position the tank so I could see what was holding it up, I ended up tilting the tank towards the rear of the car when this happened. With 5 gallons of fuel on the floor and finally putting the cap on the tank, I was contemplating my options when I discovered that if you simply put enough weight on the grounding wire, the problem will take care of itself. Let me teach you the lesson that I learned. If you're removing a fuel tank, you should remove the fuel first. But if you're not going to remove the fuel first, at least put the fuel cap on. Back to the rear, we have to remove the flexible brake line that connects the rear end to the frame of the car. And just like all nuts, they're seized. I ended up just cutting the brake line to not waste any more time on it, since everything is going to be replaced in the braking system. The parking brake cable is broken up into sections that run through the car frame. In order to separate the sections, you have to remove the tensioner brackets. Once removed, there is enough slack in the cables that you can disconnect the cables from each other. Lubing and removing the nuts while the car was still in the air was simply done out of convenience, while things are still easy to reach. If this were to be done on the ground, the service manual recommends putting a floor jack directly under the center of the differential to hold it up when you start disconnecting things. So if I were doing it correctly, there should be something supporting the differential housing before I remove the shocks here. Because the entire shop, for some reason, smells like gasoline, I had to open up a couple of doors to allow air to flow through and not risk explosions. The nuts on the shocks were actually quite easy to get off, which is why I wasn't prepared for how difficult the track bar would be to free. It was so loud using the impact that I could hear the noise echoing through the entire neighborhood at 1 a.m. So I did what any reasonable person would do and put on some hearing protection. The nuts on the lower control arm were probably the hardest to remove, simply because they were just a little more difficult to reach in such a tight space, and being seized so hard onto the bolts. I ended up having to use my 3-foot breaker bar in order to get them to move initially. The upper control arm actually was removed with relative ease, as you can see here. Since all the nuts were removed, we were ready to remove some bolts and therefore some parts. The car got lowered onto jack stands to support the rear, which I should have done before removing the shocks in the first place. But live and learn, also read before doing. some more room between the rear end and the chassis, the rear springs can now be removed. The track bar was the final holdout. It didn't want to come out of its hole. It required a little bit of persuasion. With the differential housing removed, it was finally time to disassemble it. Removing all of the brake lines seemed like a good place to start, as they were in the way of removing a lot of other things. It's important to use line wrenches that are specifically intended for brake lines to prevent rounding the nuts over. But in this case, I didn't really care because all the brake lines were getting replaced anyway. The center brake line has a couple of clips keeping it captured into the differential housing. When opening up the differential cover, it's a good idea to keep the top bolt in place, so that way you can just crack the seal and allow the oil to drain out from the bottom, and the cover won't fall off and oil spill everywhere. In this case, it wouldn't have been a problem anyway, because it appears that there was almost no oil. In fact, upon opening the differential, there was a very heavy smell of burnt oil coming from the inside. While removing the axles, you have to remove first the 4 bolts capturing the axle to the brake backing plate. You can access them through the holes in the front plate of the axle. To remove the differential gears, all you have to do is remove the bearing caps that are held on by 4 bolts, and the caps will pop off and the differential gears can be pulled right out. Do not confuse the bearing caps or shims with which side they go in. It's a good idea to mark them. And that about does it. The next step will be to clean up the differential housing, remove the seals and pinion gears, and start rebuilding it with new parts.